It's the Beth Cahill Show. And now, here's Beth.
Hello and welcome to another week of the Beth Cahill Show. Last week, I promised a show discussing politics on a national level, so that is just what I have in store for you guys today. We will discuss the state of the Democratic primary, Hunter Biden in regards to Ukraine, and of course, the impeachment inquiry. But first, I want to address a few emails I received over the weekend after my show, The Boy Crisis, aired last week. I said on the show last week that we are leaving our boys behind in today's society, and that in order to have true equality in America, we have got to lift our young boys up, the same way that we are lifting up young girls. And I received several emails, a few from moms who, like me, are raising young boys, and they thanked me for bringing attention to this issue. But I also surprisingly received a few not so happy people out there who thought I was setting girls back in how I addressed this topic. So I want to be clear about something. I have never, ever not wanted to champion young women, nor have I ever not championed young women. I have never thought that young girls and young women should not have an equal voice or a seat at the table. But what I did say was and what I'm not going to back down from is that boys deserve the same energy and resources that we are pouring into girls. It is equally important that the boys know how important that they are and that they feel valued and that they know that they are needed in this society in order for all of us to thrive. So I appreciate the disagreements and the agreements, and I always welcome all sides to this because that's how we move forward in this country. The whole idea behind this show when I decided I wanted to do it was that I wanted to be able to begin debating issues that we're facing locally and nationally. I was finding more and more that the people that I talked to, that we were actually only talking about the things that we didn't like, and we weren't discussing ideas and ways to move forward. So please know I am not backing away from this topic or any topic that is unpopular that I believe in, nor should you or anyone else. I believe that boys are being left behind, and I will continue to cover that just like you can continue to agree or disagree with me. That is the beauty of this great country of ours. So moving in to national politics, I want to talk about the state of the race as it sits right now for the Democratic primary. We have Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden at the top, and Bernie Sanders, after the last debate, has also ticked up a bit. Biden in the Real Clear Politics average is still beating Warren, but his support seems to be dropping while hers is rising, and also Bernie is rising a little bit as well. So things get a bit more interesting when you go state by state. Some she leads and some he does. In Iowa, there is basically a dead heat going on between the two of them. New Hampshire, Warren is up 3, and then in South Carolina, Biden is beating Warren by a lot. So we are about 90 days from the Iowa caucus. And Iowa is where, as most of you know, is you're going to find some candidates will drop out of the race after the Iowa caucus, depending on how well or not well they do in that race. But those 3 states, they're the first states to vote in the primary, and they are usually a fairly good indicator on what is to come and who is to stay in the race. So with that, Elizabeth Warren seems to have some enthusiasm on her side. Her fundraising numbers are good. She's, again, continuing to rise in the polls, and her performance at the debate, I thought, was actually strong considering all of the incoming that she was receiving, being the perceived front runner. I hear a lot of people that say they didn't think she had a strong debate. I disagree with that. I thought she did. The problem, though, that I continue to see with Warren is how she will play in a general election. She is going to, again, have to appeal to moderate voters and independents, and I am still unconvinced that she can do that. And apparently some Iowa voters agree with me. So there was a reporter, which there often is, going around Iowa talking to voters before the Iowa caucus. And I'm going to play a clip where some Iowa caucus goers address their issue with her in a general election as well.
What do you think will happen if one of the more progressive candidates like Warren or Sanders wins the nomination?
Well, I'm very afraid that they'll lose and we'll have 4 more years of Trump, which I hope doesn't happen.
And elaborate who you're talking about when you say free stuff.
I'm talking about Bernie. I'm talking about Elizabeth Warren and how college is going to be free, how health care is going to be free. I'm sorry. We can't do that.
So that continues again. It follows Bernie. It follows Elizabeth Warren. And Elizabeth Warren has not had a good answer for any of that. So as far as likability, Warren, I think she does very well. She wins that category. She does far better than Hillary Clinton ever did as far as likability. Clinton was always a really unpopular candidate. And Warren, she's not. In a recent NBC poll, she counted 25% support, each from party voters that were under 35 and over 65. So, and even the Democrats that did prefer somebody else to Warren for their first choice, they go back to her for their second choice. So she's relatable, she's smart, and she's pretty much, from what we're seeing on polling, the majority of the Democratic primary voters and independents first or second choice. So that's going to bode well for her down the stretch. But she does still have that problem that she continues to dodge in her Medicare proposal and how that's going to be funded. This is a real problem for her, and it's a problem that is not going away. The longer that it continues to take Warren to explain to Democratic primary voters where this money is going to come from, the more suspect this proposal looks. And this is one of her main proposals. So she needed to have been in front of this much more than she is. And, you take Bernie Sanders, for example. He's been transparent about the fact that everybody's taxes will go up in a Bernie Sanders presidency, including the middle class. He has said just that. He doesn't back away from it. Warren, however, has yet to go that far, and she's taken a lot of heat for it, not only from, as I like to call them, very friendly Liz Warren media, but also in the last debate from a lot of the other candidates. They hammered this home to her, and she didn't have a good answer. This is coming from a woman who has spent her entire career preaching Medicare for all. She darn well better have, a way to pay for it, or at least a plan out there to talk about it. She's got a plan for everything. How about we get a plan from where the money is going to come from to fund Medicare for all? But if you want to take funding out of it, let's just pretend she comes up with a plan to fund it, and her plan is unveiled. She's still pushing to kick 60 million people off of their private insurance. So the plan has flaws with funding, but it also has flaws that the majority of the American people don't want to be kicked off their private insurance. Pete Buttigieg, who I will get into later, he said it best. He calls her out. He calls out her plan for being exactly what it is. It's not only not feasible, but it's not what most Americans want. So I want to play a clip from Pete Buttigieg.
I want to turn to the Democratic race, if I can. You attacked your 2020 opponent, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, on stage over how she's going to pay for Medicare for all. A Warren campaign aide subsequently told CNN, quote, "She's reviewing the revenue options suggested by the 2016 Bernie campaign along with other revenue options, but she will only support pay-fors that meet the principles she has laid out in multiple debates." Is that answer good enough for you?
No, we need to see how this is going to be paid for, because right now, whether you copy-paste the Bernie Sanders math or do it some other way, there is a hole amounting to trillions of dollars in how this is supposed to work. And the really unfortunate thing is we can deliver health care to every American without that problem, and without the problem that I think is the central problem in her plan of kicking everybody off of their private plans in 4 years or less. That's why the approach that I'm offering, Medicare for all who want it, is a better approach. It's better because it gives you the choice to decide whether you want in on the public Medicare option or you want to stay on your private plan, and it's better because it's actually paid for.
So the attack is kind of confusing because, as you know, in 2018, you were asked whether you supported Medicare for all and whether insurance does not belong in health care, and you tweeted back in part, quote, "I, Pete Buttigieg, politician, do henceforth and forthwith declare most affirmatively and indubitably unto the ages that I do favor Medicare for all, as I do favor any measure that would help get all Americans covered." So what happened to that 2018 Medicare for all pledge?
Well, the substance is the same. Obviously, my tone there reflected...
So you're being a little cheeky, but you are supporting Medicare for all, and you no longer are.
I think Medicare for all means everybody can get into Medicare. And somewhere along the line this year, politicians started saying that it's only Medicare for all if you eliminate all private coverage, which is why I now talk about my plan with the language of Medicare for all who want it. But I think the issue here really isn't terminology. The issue is, what is it that we're going to deliver, and does it give everybody access to Medicare and choice? My plan does both of those things. It's what most Americans want. It's what most Democrats want. It's the best policy. And I'm not having these problems describing how it's going to be paid for.
I think what Pete says in that clip is so important. He makes two points that seem to be getting missed in this Democratic field of everyone wanting to shove Medicare for all down our throats. He makes the point that, first off, this can't be paid for the way that she's currently describing it. There's just not enough money. And even once she admits that, yes, taxes on the middle class will go up, there are still trillions of dollars unaccounted for. The second point that he's making here is that most Americans don't want to be kicked off their private insurance for government-run health care. He is very smart in saying that when he did Medicare for all, it's becoming the only option, right? It's Medicare for all, and there is no other choice. So no longer allowing the options for Americans to choose to opt in or out. The real question you need to ask yourselves is, do you really want the government in charge of your health care? When you get a diagnosis that is less than ideal, or God forbid a family member does, do you really want to trust the federal government to come through on something as important as health care? These are fair questions that must be asked of Elizabeth Warren. So if you're just tuning in, you are listening to the Beth Cahill Show, and we are discussing the race of the Democratic primary as it sits today. So Biden, meanwhile, is finding himself pinned down at the center of this impeachment fight, right? Even if you want to give Biden every bit of the benefit of the doubt and say that he didn't know anything about his son's dealings with Ukraine, which again is highly unlikely, this whole situation is basically giving voters a snapshot into what a general election may look like. And the problem is, Biden is good at a little bit of defense, but he has yet to go on the offensive. And if he wants to beat Trump, I'm going to have to see more than I'm seeing to even think that that could be a fair fight. So Biden also has yet to tell us why he should even be president, right? Besides Trump is bad, he continues to say just that. Trump is bad. That is why Biden should be president, right? He goes to rallies. He talks about bringing America back to civility. He wants to basically wipe away the last 3 years and return to the Obama era. There are two big problems with that, though. I have a hard time thinking, number one, that Obama's policies of 2008 or even 2012 would even be far enough to the left for this new Democratic Party. So that's the first issue. And then you take Obama out of it and you just look at Joe Biden. He's not Obama. So he wants to go back to Obama policies, but he's not Obama. Obama would have a much better time selling that than Joe Biden seems to be doing for himself. So he is, however, still in the lead. There's still a number of Democrats and independents, particularly older voters, that are more than happy to oblige Joe Biden in what he's saying and to follow him down this path. So we have yet to see him really fall heavily in the polls. We do see Warren rising. We see Bernie rising. And Joe, of course, he's falling a little bit, but he is still leading in the national polls. Another issue, though, that he's having is, unlike Warren, Sanders, and even actually Pete Buttigieg, who all have strong fundraising numbers, Biden has about $25 million that he first rolled out with, which was his strongest showing in fundraising. And he has, from what all the reporting shows, about $9 million cash on hand. That's definitely not enough. If you want to compare that with other people in his party, you've got Buttigieg, who's got about $19 million, and Sanders and Warren, who had strong third quarter fundraising months with about $25 million each. So if you say fundraising is a sign of enthusiasm, then Trump is beating Democrats by a mile because he has raised a record-breaking $125 million in the third quarter alone. That is more than any other candidate at this time ever. I'm a little cautious, though, of tying those numbers to enthusiasm only because Hillary Clinton raised and spent almost double Trump in 2016, and she had a major enthusiasm problem. So I would be a little cautious of that. The other interesting thing, though, that continues to get brought up by large donors of the Democratic Party is that no one is really in love with these candidates. There are rumblings of insiders still hoping for someone else to enter the race, even though they've got about 100 running already. This is how you know that they're not necessarily buying the national polls out there, because if you look at national polls, most of the front runners beat Trump in a head-to-head matchup. I don't really buy into that. It's too far out to tell. But it suggests that even Democratic donors aren't really buying those polls. And Hillary Clinton continues to let her advisors float the idea about her jumping back into the race. Just 2 days ago, one of Hillary's former advisors refused to rule out the idea of her jumping in the race if the circumstances are right. So, folks, the rematch we've all been waiting for may just be headed our way. So I kind of want to move on to the impeachment inquiry. And so this one has been wild to try and follow because, for starters, it hasn't been done in the public eye. So we just get bits and bits of pieces here or there. We get what Democratic lawmakers are leaking or Republicans. And basically everyone's story is a little different, right? Republicans come out of the room. They say that one thing was said. Democrats are saying another. So I'm going to do my best to try to navigate this. But where it basically started was back in September, Democrats decided that Trump's phone call with the Ukraine president was bad, right? They said there had been this whistleblower who had come forward, that he had knowledge of this call, and that Trump had basically bribed the president of Ukraine in saying that they needed to investigate Joe Biden. So this whole thing came about because Joe Biden, back when he was VP, told Ukraine that he was going to withhold $1 billion of aid unless they had fired this prosecutor, right? So you've got Joe Biden talking to an audience and telling them that, this great story about when he was able to talk about getting this guy fired and, he got him fired. So let's play the clip just for reference.
I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko. They would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting $1 billion. I said, you're not getting $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
So that's what started it, right? You have Biden flexing when he was VP. You then have Trump telling Ukraine that corruption should be looked into in regards to this. And from there, you have the whistleblower who comes forward. And then the impeachment inquiry is born. So I went through this all really quickly. I gave you a very sped up version, but that is the basics of the story and how it started. The problem is that once this whistleblower came forward to talk about how troubling this phone call was, reports came out that, number one, he wasn't even there as a firsthand person listening to the phone call. So that was problematic. And then Trump did what I don't think anyone thought he was going to do, and he released the transcript of the call. So I want to read you an exchange between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine, and you can kind of decide from yourself if you believe that there was a quid pro quo taking place, or bribery, in other words. So here is the president, and this is about 3 to 4 minutes into the conversation. President Trump starts, I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on, the whole situation. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you said yesterday, the whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller. He ran an incompetent performance. But hey, they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. So whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it, if that's possible. So that's President Trump. President Zelensky then responds, yes, it is very important for me, and everything you just mentioned earlier, for me as president. It is very important, and we are open for any future cooperation. We are ready to open a new page on cooperation between the United States and Ukraine. Then Trump says, good, because I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. A lot of people are talking about that, the way they shut down your very good prosecutor. And you had some very bad people involved. Mr. Giuliani is a highly respected man. He was the mayor of New York City, a great mayor, and I would like him to call you. I will ask him to call you along with the Attorney General. Rudy very much knows what's happening, and he is a very capable guy. If you could speak to him, that would be great. The other thing, and then he talks about a couple of other things that have nothing to do with this, and then he goes on to say this. This is the problem people are having. The other thing, this is Trump. There's a lot of talk about Biden, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. So that's it, folks. That's the call. That is the call that they are trying to impeach him for. Nowhere in the call did he say he would withhold aid based on whether they would look into Biden. That was never mentioned. And then you have the president of Ukraine, who after this call was harassed by reporters, and he also stated that there was no quid pro quo. In fact, he didn't even know that the aid was being held up. So I think that there's a few ways to look at this. I think for starters, the Dems have obviously wanted Trump impeached since Inauguration Day, right? There have been calls and even votes on the floor to impeach him far before this Ukraine call. It's not to say that there wasn't some backdoor dealings happening. I don't mean illegal dealings. I just mean that Trump has his own way of doing things, and he has definitely upset the status quo for the last 3 years in his approach to foreign policy and his approach in dealing with foreign leaders. So do I think that this was any different? No, I absolutely do not. But there has been a lot of confusion behind what concerns Trump had when he withheld and later approved the aid to Ukraine. There's a piece in the Examiner, in the Washington Examiner, that I think nails it. They describe 5 reasons for his concerns about U.S. aid to Ukraine. One being his dislike in the United States giving foreign aid to any country to begin with. And that's not far-fetched. He has talked about that all the time. He's proposed cutting foreign aid since he stepped onto the political scene 4 years ago. He doesn't think that the United States gets a fair shake when it comes to how much we contribute in regards to other countries. To know that, just go back to the transcript. He talks about that openly with Zelensky. Trump is also concerned about corruption in Ukraine, which would also be in line with several other presidents. It's a well-known fact that with Ukraine comes a massive amount of corruption, and Trump would not be the first to suggest tying anti-corruption conditions to foreign aid. It's exactly what Biden said he was doing when he was threatening to withhold the $1 billion. Trump also believes a lot of the Russia investigation started in Ukraine. He's floated this theory that someone in the Ukraine has the DNC server that was hacked in 2016. This is the server that the DNC didn't want investigators to examine. This is a theory that they point out in the Examiner. It doesn't have a lot of basis in facts, but nonetheless, if you're trying to think of Trump's reasoning, it could be part of that in his thought process to withhold the aid. And the last of the 5 is that Trump wants to make sure that, again, corruption is being handled in Ukraine regarding Hunter Biden. Just because you're a political opponent does not mean that you can't be investigated. We should all know that from the Russia investigation. Trump believes that Joe Biden, as vice president, corruptly pressed the Ukrainians to fire that prosecutor to spare Hunter from the investigation in his deal with the Ukraine energy company, one where he had no experience in this industry whatsoever, but he landed himself a spot on the board, making $50,000 plus a month. There are several reasons into the possible thinking of why the aid could have been held up. And this story, again, it's so fluid, and every day it seems to have a turning point. We, unfortunately, though, are out of time today. But next week, since there is now a basis for why this started, I will go into the process that we are seeing kind of take place in the basement of the Capitol. And I'll try to break it all down the best that I can. It's a wild story, and it seems to take a new turn every day. So thanks again for tuning in to another week of The Beth Cahill Show, and I will be back next week, same time, same day, for more.
This has been The Beth Cahill Show. If you have any feedback for Beth or would like to suggest a future topic or guest for the show, email beth@thebethcahillshow.com. That's Beth at thebethcahill, spelled Cahill, show.com. Tune in again next Saturday morning at 9 for more of The Beth Cahill Show, right here on AM 1590. The Answer.